Penguin here. Welcome to the first ever episode of Theory Review, where we take beloved theories from the community, explain them, go over the evidence, analyze them for their validity, and add our own evidences if we have anything to add before giving them a rating out of 5. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this series takes us, because boy howdy are there a lot of amazing theories out there worth looking into and discussing. But before we start, if you've watched my videos before and are interested in seeing them again, why not give us a like and subscribe? I mean, it will tell the algorithm that you want to see more from us down the road. Benefits you, it sounds like. Alright, let's get into the topic for today. We'll be going over my first ever Zelda theory, not as a YouTuber, but as a fan. I remember as a small child, playing Zelda games was something that brought me significant joy. And with all the difficulty that I had just, reading the dialogue, reading don't never do nothing. I would often just make assumptions about things that seemed more or less to make sense. One of those assumptions was actually directly in line with one of Zelda's most popular theories. Within the fan base of Ocarina of Time, there's a popular theory stating that Link and Zelda in this game are siblings. While I certainly won't try to take credit for the creation of this theory or for its popularity, I will say that I did come to this conclusion without any outside help. The internet was a much more limited resource back then, both just in general and in my own home at the time. So I didn't even know what theorizing was yet. But even as a small child, I was deeply entrenched in my theory-forming thought patterns, seeing connections that weren't explicitly stated and drawing conclusions based on those evidences. And, well, if you really go for it, yeah, you could call that theorizing. That said though, small kids are, well, maybe not always the smartest. At least not yet. Needless to say, I'm sure that I jumped to a lot of incorrect conclusions about a lot of stuff back in the day. So, now that I'm older, I would love to turn a discerning eye to this theory and evaluate it for its actual likelihood. Let's start with the potential evidences for this theory that are explicit in-game, starting with Link's origin story. Everyone knows that Link's mother ran from war when Link was but a babe. Fearing that her pursuers would harm her and the child, she made her way into the Lost Woods and gave her child into the watchful protection of the Great Deku Tree before passing on. Link was thus raised an unknowing orphan, and believed himself to be a member of the Kokiri. Not a lot is known about Link's mother, at least not other than this story, but a simple analysis of a few key points can help us to deduce at least a few things more about her. Most of the stuff that we can learn about her aside from said story is going to have to come from the only connections that we really knew she had. First, we know from the fact that Link is a Hylian that she must have been a Hylian as well. If she had been, say, a Gerudo, Link wouldn't have been born a Hylian male. Not sure how it would have looked if she were instead a member of the Sheikah or a member of the Zoras or something like that. But the fact that the Deku Tree and the Deku Tree Sprout know Link is definitively Hylian would suggest that his mother was a Hylian as well, as their only reason to know his genetic background in that regard would be from the race that his mother was a part of, as well as Link's own genetic traits. And why don't we talk about those traits for a second? Link has blue eyes and blonde hair in this title. While that isn't exactly exclusive to this iteration of Link, you'd be surprised just how rare it is. In the majority of the Zelda titles, Link's hair actually has a more brownish hue to it. I mean, sure, one could still call it sandy or dirty blonde in many cases, but in this title, it's a bright yellow blonde. The only other games with that exact hair color are the ones that feature Toon Link and the hero of legend from A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, and the Oracle games. And even then, Toon Link's eye color isn't terribly consistent, so those blue eyes don't match Toon Link. Probably. The tops of his eyes appear a greenish blue or bluish green, but the Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass artwork show a tint of brown in the lower section. Much of the art even goes so far as to make the eyes uniformly black. So I'm not really sure what the intention was here. Assuming, however, that the colored section at the top is intended as a reflective highlight, it does give Toon Link brown eyes rather than blue. Why is this important though? Well, blonde hair and blue eyes are both typically very rare colors to have, as they are both traits with multiple recessive alleles required to show off that particular color. Both of them combined is thus also comparatively rare. In the US, a country that actually has a predominantly European background and therefore also probably a higher than average rate of blonde hair and blue eyes, it's estimated that only 1.5% of the population have both natural blonde and blue eyes. And globally, that average is actually significantly lower, though certain regions of the world have much higher estimates, like Sweden, for example. Let's take a look at Hyrule, though, because honestly, the rates at which humans have blonde hair and blue eyes is going to be different from how Hylians might. It seems that, at least during this point in the timeline, blue eyes are actually extremely common. Of the 28 Hylians we see whose eyes have actual irises, 17 of them have blue eyes, and the majority of the remainder have small black dots that could really be anything. Only 2 Hylians have irises that are clearly a different color than blue, one being this wizardly old man who tells you about the lens of truth, and his eyes are brown. The only other person is the woman who runs the Bombchu bowling alley, whose eyes are green. It's therefore fairly likely that blue eyes are not actually a recessive trait among Hylians. What is rare, however, is blonde hair. Of the 37 Hylians in this game, counting those who share character models as one entry, like the soldiers and the spider dudes, only 3 Hylians have blonde hair. Those 3 are Link, Zelda, and Sheik. Sheik is just Zelda in a disguise, so really it's just 2. This means that it's extremely likely that blonde hair is a recessive trait among Hylians. Blonde hair is, however, quite popular among the Kokiri, being shared by literally every single one of them except for Saria. In addition to this, every single Kokiri whose eyes that we can see has blue eyes. The Great Deku Tree in Wind Waker tells us that the Kokiri took on these forms to emulate the Hylians and help Link fit in better and feel less secluded. Yeah, that didn't really pan out very well, did it? Maybe try telling the kids not to bully Link. Let's start with that, maybe, yeah. In any case, the fact that the Kokiri took on forms that almost all feature blonde hair and blue eyes would be incredibly strange if they're going based off of the general population, as the only 2 Hylians in this game that feature blonde hair are Link and Zelda. That said, they've also only ever seen Link and his mother, so if they both had blonde hair and blue eyes, it would make sense that the Kokiri would assume that all Hylians share those traits, and use that as a basis for their more Hylian appearance. So we've established that Link's mother likely had blonde hair and blue eyes, both from a genetics perspective and a world-building perspective. We've also established that Zelda is the only other Hylian we've seen who shares those blonde hairs and, well, not blue eyes, but you know, it works. And though I haven't mentioned it yet, Zelda never talks about her mother, nor do we ever hear about or meet a good candidate for Link's father. If these 2 share a parentage, that would honestly make a lot of sense. That's the surface level stuff that led me to believe that this theory was the case back when I was a kid, and honestly, it does seem to mostly be enough. That said, now that I know these games a lot better than I did as a kid, there are still a couple of other things worth bringing up. The first is in a location that is simultaneously one of the most interesting and most overlooked locations in Ocarina of Time, that being the royal family's tomb. At the very back of the graveyard in Kakariko Village is a large grave that features a Triforce symbol on the ground in front of it. We are told that this grave marks the location of the royal family's tomb, and upon playing Zelda's Lullaby, a song passed down through the royal family and the Sheikah for some time, lightning splits the sky and destroys the stone, granting Link entry to its depths. Inside the crypt, Link can find skeletal remains, a torch puzzle with a 50 rupee reward, very nice, and redeads and acid pools guarding the backmost room, whose only purpose is to house a granite slab with a song and a poem. The song is the Sun Song, and the poem that accompanies it is of special note for us today. It reads, "The rising sun will eventually set. A newborn's life will fade. From sun to moon, moon to sun, give peaceful rest to the living dead." Now, this poem's inclusion makes a fair amount of sense in this location. It's both a puzzle about using the Sun Song to freeze redeads in the previous room, as well as a simple phrase regarding the passage of time and life's march towards an inevitable death, which, yeah, I mean, that makes sense in a tomb. However, it could be notable that the song and poem were both written by the composer brothers, as they tell you this if you defeat them before entering the tomb. They also tell you that they were game overed by Ganondorf when he sought the song's power. This means that the song and poem were likely written shortly before or during the Hylian Civil War, when Ganondorf would not yet have been under the vassalage of the Kingdom of Hyrule. There's also the fact that this poem mentions a newborn's life fading, and that could be a really great hint. If the song and poem were written around the time of the war, then it would also have been written around the time that Zelda's mom fled the fires of war with her son. If she was indeed the queen, this poem could be mourning the loss of the queen and the young prince, whose life had supposedly faded. Assuming that the two had lost their lives, the composer brothers, who worked closely with the royal family by their own admission, would have been commissioned to make a place to ceremonially respect their loss. And the final evidence of this is that, unless the room with the redeads is the room where the royal family is held, as the redeads are undead zombies themselves, the room one would have to assume would hold the people interred in this tomb is actually empty. This back room with its epitaph doesn't even have a coffin. Now, it's possible that the poem is more generic, referring to a newborn not because a baby was lost, but because that's how life starts, and the poem clearly focuses on life cycling from beginning to the end. In addition, if the redeads aren't intended to be the guards of this place and are instead intended to be the ones who were buried in the tomb, the empty back room might mean very little. But I still think that with the genetic markers as well as the timing, it does seem to make for quite the compelling piece of evidence for this Link being the prince theory. The final piece of evidence for today will actually come from Majora's Mask. There's a very important counterpart to Link in this game that may add a small, tiny amount of credibility to this theory as well. That counterpart is Kafei. Kafei is the first playable character in the entire series not named Link canonically. Granted, it is only for a very short section of the game, but it's still incredibly notable as Kafei and Link help one another in a very important section of the game. Kafei is a character who was once a man who, after an altercation with the Skull Kid, was reverted back into a boy. He's the son of the mayor, who was betrothed to be married to Anju, the innkeeper's daughter. Link helps him out during the game's largest and most touching side quest, one based on a scenario that the entire game was actually made based on. But that's a story for another day. In any case, Link and Kafei share a lot of parallels. Both were once adults but are now forced back into adolescence. Both shoulder a lot of responsibility for their regions, and both are playable in some form during this game's runtime. They are close to the same height, and some theorize that Kafei may actually be Link's counterpart in Termina. Many of the other characters from Ocarina of Time have counterparts, and while not all of them do, it would make a lot of sense if we were to see one for Link, and with Kafei being around the same height, similar facial features, though different hair and eye colors, and other similarities and small differences, it could make sense that these two are intended to be both the same and opposite, with Link being a child forced to become an adult, and Kafei forced from an adult to being a child. I personally really like this theory a lot, but regardless of whether or not it's true, it's clear that the parallels between these two are intentional to some extent, whether as doppelgangers or as foils. And if it's true that they are meant to parallel each other, whether simply as a literary analogy or as a literal parallel world copy, it would make a lot of sense if one of them was the son of Clocktown's leader, that the other would be the son of the leader of Castletown, which, by the way, is the king. Perhaps this is more of a loose connection, but I still think it's compelling enough to add. Okay, now that we've had a whole rundown of everything that the theory entails, let's get into the criticisms of the theory. As far as I can tell, there's really only one major criticism from most of the community, and it comes from this game's Zelda Link fanbase. At the end of the game, Link and Zelda share something of a tender moment before Zelda sends Link back in time. It's getting a little bit Star Wars-y up in here. Oh. Personally, I only kind of see where they're coming from on this. It's framed as a touching moment for sure, and it's certainly not impossible that this was intended to be romantic, as, you know, there is in fact premarital hand-holding going on.
Besides, how could he ever find out about this?
I don't know though, to me I don't think that that's enough. I personally think that this is more platonic. Zelda is making these gestures in a show of remorse and apology. She did, after all, steal away his childhood and basically ruin the world. It makes sense that she would feel a great amount of gratitude towards Link for fending this off, while also feeling a good amount of guilt, and the actions that she's taking here, the emotions she's clearly showing, are pretty in line with that. Not to mention, in this game, Link is basically a harem anime protagonist. He has a childhood friend who is much older than she looks, a fish tsundere, a quaint farm girl, and even a Dami mommy going after him. It would be really, really weird if in this game about a harem anime protagonist, the only girl who liked him but never even had a single line to show that she did was the one in the game's title. Yeah, I don't know. I personally feel like this criticism is pretty heavily outweighed. This one is going to get a very, very high rating, I can already tell you that. So let's introduce the scale. We will be rating this theory on a scale of 1 to 5. A 5 in these videos will mean that the theory we're talking about will basically be canon. It will have mountains of supporting evidence, few and weak criticisms, and a good deal of synergy with the story. It might help the themes, or it might enhance the narrative that we get, or character development that we see. A 4 is a very good theory, one with a lot of evidence to back it up that seems fairly likely, though potentially not intentional on the part of the developers. It might have good synergy with the story, or help out characters, but it might also be very clear that this is kind of a stretch. A 3 is a mediocre theory. It might not have a lot of evidence, or might have convincing counter-arguments, but is still one that's worth considering and fun to think about. A 2 is a weak theory, one that contradicts plenty of in-game evidence, but I can at least see where you would get to your conclusions. And finally, a 1 is a theory that is dead in the water. A theory that blatantly contradicts canon or has only weak or no evidence to back it up. Based on these criteria, where does today's theory fit? Well, it should come as no surprise that this theory receives 5 out of 5 stars from me. It deepens one's understanding of the conflicts and characters of this game in a way that feels truly intentional. It fleshes out the world building and has no clear contradictory evidence that I could find in the game, though if you do find any, make sure to leave it in the comments. I don't want to be the only one who's throwing out my own personal thoughts on this. So if you've got a real good reason why Link and Zelda can't be siblings, let me know, though because you ship Zelda and Link isn't a reason.
Why not? Why not?
Anyways, sorry. I personally think that this makes a lot of sense, both using real-world logic and in-universe logic, and it's a lot of fun to think about. So for these reasons, I'm gonna give it a perfect 5 out of 5. If you agree with me, or if you feel that you could use a little bit more convincing, however, then you might also want to consider another video of mine about the Hylian Civil War, its origins, and the backstory of the people of Ikana. I'm gonna leave a link to it both here and in the end title cards. If you haven't seen it yet, I do give it a high recommendation. Not only does it talk about the Hylian Civil War and how Link might have gotten lost in the first place from this whole Hyrulean conflict, but it also goes into a lot of interesting things for both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, as well as the series as a whole. So yeah, if you haven't seen it yet, give that one a watch. That just about wraps things up for today's video though. I personally had a lot of fun with it. How about you guys? I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. If you have a theory that you would like to get critiqued, leave a link or a description in the comments, and join our Discord group and make sure to share it with us in the Theories channel. As always, big thanks to our channel members, Berber0555, and who knows, maybe you next time. If you'd like to support the channel and get a call out like this at the end of each of our videos, perhaps consider becoming a channel member. It's only $2.99 a month, and with your subscription, you'll not only support our channel in making these videos a priority, you'll also get access to channel-specific custom emojis, perfect for chatting with other members of the flock. I hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I did. I look forward to seeing you next time, but until then, this is Outcast Penguin, signing off.